Hey guys, I'm your host Smitha and welcome to Journey Podcast, your weekly podcast on transformational journeys. Hope you guys enjoy. Hello everybody, I have Wanda Sternberg with me today. She lives on Camino Island in state of Washington with her husband, one dog, two cats, and two birds. She enjoys bird watching, nature, photography, and knitting. She is an alcoholic in recovery for nearly 26 years and an advocate against domestic violence. She shares her experience, strengths, and hope to let others know it is possible to overcome and live a happy, fulfilling life.
Mhm.
Thank you for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor and it's my pleasure to be here. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
um,
Please go ahead and explain your story. And yes.
yeah, you bet. Where to start? So I will start briefly, very briefly, with kind of my upbringing. I was born into a maybe not upper middle class, but middle class family. I have two sisters and a brother. I have one of my sisters is a twin sister, and the other one is older. My brother is a couple of years younger than I am. So we lived on 5 acres. It was a rural area, and my father raised game birds and pheasants, and so we always had animals around. Um, and there isn't anything specifically in my family that I can recall that would have affected me personally, other than it was just an average normal, quote
Normal
unquote,
life.
normal family. And now I'm not sure I'm going to call my family normal. But I did then. Yeah. So growing up, it was a normal childhood. Everything was good. There were a couple of incidents when I was in school that traumatized me a bit. Um, the first one was probably first grade, I want to say, first or second grade. I'm not, I believe it was first grade, but anyway, I peed my pants. And I was absolutely mortified, of course. And all the kids, made fun of me and everything. Well, we got through that. And then the second incident was when I was in fifth grade, I was in a mixed classroom, sixth and fifth graders. We were given a homework assignment to bring an article from the newspaper, and we were going to read it out loud and report on it. And the article that I brought, I believed, said, "Woman found wrapped in blanket." What it actually said was, "Woman found raped in blanket." And one of the older students, of course, had to correct me in front of the rest of the class. And I didn't really know exactly what that meant. I didn't understand the word rape. Um, but I knew that there was some kind of a connotation about it that was, not a subject that was talked about a lot at that time. So anyway, that also was a mortifying incident to me. Probably doesn't seem like a big deal, but it did sort of shape me in that I became I was always shy. I was always kind of withdrawn and shy. I didn't like to talk in front of classrooms and that kind of thing, but it made me even more so. It made me more of an introvert. And my twin sister, on the other hand, was the extrovert between the two of us. So moving on, we get into junior high, which is, junior high is junior high, and I don't think much has changed there. It's sort of you're trying to find your place and be part of the the norm, society, whatever you want to call it. um, didn't really feel like I belonged pretty anywhere, really. I wasn't in any kind of a group. I tried to get involved in some extracurricular things like cheerleading and whatever, and it was just never quite good enough, I guess. Or that was my feeling, was I was never quite good enough to to get there. Even though I tried, but I was rejected, and it was like heartbreaking. Never had a boyfriend all through high school. Never went to the dances, never went to the proms or anything. I did try to fit in with my own little group of friends. We were not the popular kids, but we were not the we were not the worst of the worst, and we weren't the best of the best either. So we started, my friends and I started dabbling in some illegal substances in high school. Not a lot, but enough. And I had a friend whose brother was a motorcycle gang member, and he kind of had an influence on her, and she in turn, brought that to us, and we said, sure, why not? We'll help. We'll help you we'll help you drink this, or we'll help you eat that, or whatever it was. And then moving on, I went to college, not because I really knew what I was doing or what I wanted to do, but it was because I felt it was expected of me. It's what everybody wanted me to do. So I go to college, where I finally met a boy that took an interest in me. So I was like, wow, okay. um, and that whole and how can I put this delicately? That whole thing was um, uh, a learning experience. I went off to college to learn how to have a relationship with a boy, drink, and that was about it. So it was a big party all the time. Needless to say, I didn't last in college very long. After the end of the first semester, the college administration asked me to leave. So home I go, back to my parents. Feeling bad because I, didn't succeed again. Still didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. And it was just kind of the way I always felt. It was like I just didn't really belong. And even though there were things that I did that were good, um, for instance, I had a horse that I had received as a gift when I was 13, I think 13, 14. And it was a young horse, was not trained yet. And I raised that horse and trained him so that I could ride him. And we went to shows and we showed and we did different things. And that was like the best thing in my life, the absolute best thing in my life. Up to, getting out of college and then moving on, trying to move on with my life. Um, my uh, my parents found out that this boyfriend that I met in college and I were again doing illegal substances, and I was 18 just, but they said, nope, you're not going to see this guy anymore. And of course I was angry at my parents, I was angry at everything. It was like they sent me to see a psychiatrist, and I said, I didn't talk much, but the one thing that came out of that was, she has trouble making decisions. Yeah, I do. And I still struggle with that to this day, that a decision is put before me, and if I don't make a decision, one will be made for me. I've learned that, right? I've learned that if I don't decide, one will be made for me. And oftentimes I get paralyzed by having to make the decision, and it's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. But anyway, so yeah, the the self-esteem of being introverted, of not feeling like I belonged, really played a role, I think, in what I did, the choices that I made going forward. And turning 21, when it became legal for me to drink, we kind of steered away from the substances, so to speak, and went more to the alcohol. And in the meantime, I'm looking for love in all the wrong places. I'm thinking that the way to a man's heart is by having sex with him. So there were a lot of uh, one night stands, a lot of failed relationships, and I met a guy at the tavern that I used to go to all the time, and he and I became close. We became intimate, and we eventually decided we should get married. So we get engaged. I get pregnant. we get married. He's working and he's not really happy. So I say, well, why don't you find another job? And in the meanwhile, I'm working too. Um, I have a baby. I have a baby girl. After 6 months, I go back to work. He's working. He's miserable. He's not happy. I say, why don't you find something that you want and then quit your job? Get a different job. Well, he quit his job, but he didn't go back to work. And what he wanted to do was live off the land, right? He wanted to live off of the land, and so we moved to a little forest area by a river in his parents' A-frame cabin that they had there. That was their recreational property. Okay, so we moved there. Meanwhile, get pregnant, and I have a second child. And he's sitting in the garden watching things grow, and I'm trying to earn some money because I'm thinking we have to have some money. We can't, it doesn't work that way. So although I'm sure there are people, some of the survivalists and whatnot can do it, but I just didn't feel that was really what it wasn't really what I wanted. It was what he wanted. And so I'm trying to be the dutiful, obedient wife, like I thought I was supposed to be. Um, and I didn't realize it at the time, but in looking back, I came to the conclusion that that was actually my first experience in a domestic abuse relationship. He was controlling, he was isolating me, he was, just dictating everything about my life. If I talked on the phone with anyone, which originally we didn't even have a telephone, but because I was pregnant, I said we need to have a telephone in case of an emergency, right? So anyway, this was the days before cell phones. Okay. I'm old. I'm old. Okay, I'm old.
Oh, I know the days before cell phone too, so don't worry about it.
uh, so we had the phone. If I talked to anybody, it was immediately, well, what did they say? He wanted to know all of the details, and I didn't understand at the time that that was domestic abuse. Well, after about 4 years, 4.5 years or so of being married, I'd had enough, and I just was unhappy, and I said I want a divorce. So I took the two girls and I left, and I moved to Oregon to be closer to where my family had migrated to. And I was just full of shame, full of guilt, because I was the first one ever in my family to get a divorce. In my entire, even in my extended family, okay, as far as I knew, I was the only one who had ever gotten divorced. And you just didn't do that in those days. You tried to make it work, and but I couldn't. And anyway, full of shame, full of guilt, I started drinking pretty heavily, and it just became easy to console myself with beer. That was my choice. Beer was really my choice, although I would drink just about any kind of alcohol, but beer was my choice. It was inexpensive and easy to get, and blah 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 blah. So I'm renting a house there, and my dad had introduced me to a man who was working for him, and uh, he was a good-looking guy, tall drink of water, good-looking guy. And he showed up at my door one night with a half case of beer under his arm. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is my kind of guy, right? Come on in, we'll have some beer. And anyway, so we developed a relationship, that it was kind of funny because he was different. He didn't seem to be, he had graduated from high school, but he didn't seem to be all that well educated. That was my personal thought. And but he was a nice looking guy, and we had some things in common. We like to go fishing, we like to do things and go hiking and whatnot. Well, um, long story short, I got pregnant. Um, he wanted to get married, and I really had to think about that because I just wasn't feeling that it was the right thing to do, but I did it anyway. I said, okay, we'll get married. So that gave him a license to take control. And he, excuse me, so here we are, two practicing alcoholics, um, living together. We have a child together. He's taking control. He is intimidating just because of his size. He's this big, tall guy. My two girls were afraid of him, and he became abusive. He became emotionally abusive. He was sexually abusive um, with me, and um, could have been physically abusive, although I didn't see. I saw the potential. Let's put it that way. I knew it was possible, but he refrained most of the time from getting physical with me, other than the sexual part. Um, he refrained, although he did end up, we got in an argument one night and he ended up pulling a gun on me. Called the sheriff. The sheriff showed up. Um, the sheriff really couldn't do anything unless he had shot me. And I was like, what? And I said, okay, we'll simmer down, we'll behave ourselves, and they left. And meanwhile, I had sent my children over to be with my parents, so they were out of the situation. And he did at that point get physical with his older daughter from a previous marriage, and I sent her out of the house. And she was the one who called the sheriff for us. So this went on for a little while longer, and I finally said, again, after about 4 years, 4.5 years, or something in that number, I guess, I'd had enough, and I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I don't want my children to be hurt. I don't want to live a life like this. I was miserable, and I had gone to see a psychologist, a counselor. I'd gone to see a counselor at one point, and because I was so unhappy, and I went and I talked to her, and she said, "Do you drink?" And I thought, well, yeah, but this is not why I'm here to see you. I'm here to see you because I'm miserable in my marriage, and I need to do something. And it was like, well, I think first you need to address your drinking problem. And I left there so disappointed. I was like, this was not the answer that I wanted. Um, and of course, I'm an alcoholic in denial at that point, and yeah, it was when you look back on these things, you can have a better understanding of what was going on at the time. But when you're in the middle of it, you're blind. You're just blind. Um, so anyway, I met with an attorney, and we decided that we were going to get a restraining order. He was going to be physically removed from the house by the sheriff, and we would get on with things. We would go ahead with the divorce proceedings. So the sheriff showed up to remove him from the household, and he called the neighbor who had a cabin there that was his recreational cabin, and he'd come and visit on the weekends, and we all became good friends. But anyway, uh, so my ex-husband called John and said, can I go stay in your place for a little while? And he didn't really explain what was going on. So I take my kids and I go to my parents' house that was about a mile away, stayed there temporarily, and then came back to the house and discovered that he was living next door. And he stalked me. He stalked me. He would stand down at the end of the road and do this to me, point his finger like he had a gun in his hand and, do this, pull the trigger. He was trying to intimidate me. He tried to do all kinds of things. He reported me to the Department of Motor Vehicles and said I had seizures while I was driving, that I wasn't, fit driver, especially with kids in the car. He reported us to the IRS. He was trying to ruin me, both still emotionally, financially, and he didn't actually touch me, but it was only a matter of time. It was only a matter of time before it would turn physical, and I knew that. Um, he finally, the community. We lived in a small community, so by this time, of course, everybody knows what's going on, and he couldn't get work anymore in the community, so he left and got work um, on the other side of the mountains, which we lived on one side, and he went across the mountains and was working. And meanwhile, had visitation rights to see our son. We got through the divorce. He showed up at court and told the judge uh, that he knew that my family had paid off the judge, and that oh yeah, you should have been there. It was a good show. Um, anyway, he made this speech to the judge and then he walked out and he left. But I still had to sit there and go through the divorce proceedings and answer the judge's questions, et cetera, et cetera. And by the time it was done, and it was like, yes, we're granting you the divorce and we're granting you custody, but there will be visitation. And I actually left there disappointed because I I don't know, somehow I felt like this was going to be the answer to my misery, that once that divorce was final, everything was going to be great. Um, but that's not what happened. I got the divorce and everything basically was still the same. I just didn't have a husband anymore. I didn't have to live with this man anymore, but I still had to participate in the visitation rights. So it was like every other weekend, I'm handing our son off to this man who I'm worried is going to kidnap my son and take him somewhere or mistreat him somehow or do whatever. So there was a lot of that going on. And of course, I'm still drinking. It was, it became a need for me. It became a need for me. And this is what happens. Not every alcoholic has this, I guess. Everybody's a little bit different, but my experience was that there was a need. um, it was not only a habit, but it was a necessity. I couldn't get through the day without drinking. So he's on the other side of the mountains, and the visitations are getting fewer and further between, because of one thing or another. He's busy or he can't do it or whatever. So we're trying to get life back to normal, but I'm still drinking. My sister, in the meantime, my twin sister, in the meantime, has moved closer to the vicinity. She's drinking heavily for whatever reason. I still don't exactly know. But anyway, we know that alcoholism runs in families, right? We know that there's a genetic side to it, and we know there's the physical side to it. So anyway, so the family gets together, does an intervention, and sends my sister to treatment for her alcoholism. And I'm thinking, yeah, I know I drink too much. I should be more supportive of her, and I should stop, or at least not drink so much. So I tried. I tried different things. I tried like only drinking on the weekends. I tried, only every other drink would be water or something. I tried all these different things, and I couldn't stop. I could not stop. I would drive the car past the store, thinking I'm just going home. I'm not stopping. And the car would turn into the parking lot and park, and I'd get out and I'd go in and I'd buy a beer to take home with me. I worked at housekeeping jobs, and most of the jobs that I did, I would have a key. I would go in and I would clean house, and then I would leave. So the people that I was working for generally were not home. I would go to their houses, and I would. This was not part of my plan, but it happened 99.9% of the time. I would get into the house, I would go to the refrigerator, I would open the door, and I would pull out a beer because most of them drank. Um, and I would drink it, and I would proceed to drink a whole six pack while I was there cleaning. And then I would leave, and I would go to the store, and I would buy a six pack of beer to replace the one I drank. I would go back to their house, replace the beer, and leave again. Now, it never dawned on me at that time to just buy a six pack of beer on my way to work, take it with me so I would have it. And then I wouldn't have to go to the store and replace the beer and, go through all that rigmarole. Never occurred to me. But that's the insanity of I wasn't planning on drinking. It was not in my plan to drink that day, or at least not while I was at work. I wasn't going to drink in the morning. I wasn't going to drink at work. I wasn't going to drink and drive. I wasn't going to do all of these things that I ended up doing. And I was very fortunate in that I never got a DUI. I did get pulled over, but I never got a DUI. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't get in an accident. There were all of these things that could have happened that didn't. So about a year, probably a year after my sister had gone through treatment and had been sober for a little while, my life was just going into the toilet. And um, my older sister had offered a place for me to stay. And I decided, yeah, I'm going to get out of here. This place I'm renting, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go live with her for a little bit and get my act back together, and we'll move on with our lives, right? So we did that. I was having trouble with my oldest daughter at that point, who was acting out because of all that they'd been through with me. And my twin sister said, I'm going to take you to see this counselor that I know and to help you with your daughter. I'm like, okay. So the day that she's supposed to come, I'm getting ready in the morning and I'm having my beer before I go because I can't go anywhere now without having a beer. And we go, as soon as she arrived at the door, I went, I know what this is about. She's taking me to treatment. This is the intervention. So she took me to treatment. I saw a counselor. We went through the evaluation, and he said, yeah, we think you would benefit from our intensive outpatient treatment, which involves 3 nights a week for, I think it was something like 8 weeks or more. And then, basically it's a year-long program. So, but I was kind of like, yeah, it's time. It's time. And started going to AA meetings, and this all happened down in Oregon. And when I was about almost 2 years sober, I decided that I wanted to leave Oregon and move back to my home state of Washington. And I did. with my kids, packed up my kids, and we moved here. And I got a job working at a veterinary clinic, which was like a dream job for me. My girlfriend had offered me a place to stay, so I stayed with her for a couple of months until I had earned some money working, got an apartment, and then we finally ended up moving into a house, and then I ended up buying a house. So, and all the while I'm going to these meetings and I am learning a lot about myself. And this is where I was able to turn things around and learn that one of the things that I learned through the process of recovery was I always had expectations on other people to change so that I would be okay. Um, because I wasn't happy inside. I didn't like living in my body. I didn't like being in my skin, but I couldn't understand for the longest time, of course, why that was, you know. And once I got into recovery, I finally felt like I was where I belonged. And I started learning things and I started learning things about myself. And it was the biggest thing I think that I've gotten out of it is not only staying sober, yay, but uh, how to do relationships, how to set boundaries, how to be able to come out of my shell, be confident in myself, and know that I don't need that person to change so I can be okay. I have to be okay first, right? I have to be okay with me. If this is a relationship that isn't going to work, that's okay. It's okay. It doesn't have to. Not every relationship is going to have to work. And I am now married again for the third time to a man who is also in recovery. And we do relationship differently than I have ever done with any man before because we know, because we have learned, we know. And I started a home-based business at one point with an outfit called Jamberry. They were doing the press-on vinyl nail wraps that were pressure and heat treated to stay on your fingernails. And part of their group um, started a domestic violence campaign, a fight against domestic violence campaign, excuse me. They didn't start the domestic violence, they started the fight against it. And so they were doing fundraising for the fight against domestic violence. And that, of course, touched me as a victim, as a survivor. And I became involved with that and I went through their advocacy training. So I am now a domestic violence advocate, a fight against domestic violence advocate. I always say that wrong. And, I'm here to let people know that they don't have to remain victims. But if there are drugs and alcohol involved, you got to do something about it, And my experience says that drugs and alcohol are involved in domestic violence situations the majority of the time. I don't know what the actual statistics are. I couldn't recite those to you, but I'm sure there are statistics out there that will tell you that drugs and alcohol are often a factor in domestic violence. And of course, my concern over the last going on 2 years now is because of the lockdowns and everything, people having to hunker down and stay in place, that there's been a rise in domestic violence cases because can't get away from it. There's no escape. You're hunkering down to stay safe and keep everybody else safe, but you're in a dangerous situation. So I would encourage people to make sure they have numbers for their local domestic violence advocacies. There are there's city help, there's county help, there's a national hotline, and that I would encourage anybody who is currently experiencing domestic violence in their homes to make sure that they have those numbers that they can call and set up something with a close friend, a watchword, a call word, or say if something is happening at home and you need help, you call me and you tell me you want my recipe for spaghetti sauce or something, and that will be my cue that you're in a dangerous situation and I need to call for help for you. So those are the kinds of things you can set up, unknown to your partner. I was very lucky in that I had a very supportive family around me. I had, a supportive community around me. So I was able to get away from the situation without, although I did have a restraining order, which was like basically no better than the piece of paper it was written on. But I did have backup, right? I did have backup. So, and I do sadly need to report that ex-husband, after I moved to Washington State, died of a massive coronary, which was sad. And I was able to come to a place of forgiveness with him, not forgetting that what he did was terrible, but he was a sick man. He was a very sick man. He didn't know how to get help. He didn't even know enough to ask for help. He was in denial the whole time with his alcoholism and his upbringing. There are just so many things in his case that I could see after the fact. That he basically kind of backed himself into a corner with his behaviors and didn't know any better, didn't know how to get out of it, didn't know that he needed help. So it was a very sad situation for him. I still say he's an asshole because he was. And but he was also a human being. He is also a very sick human being, and I've been able to forgive that. I was able to forgive him as a human being, just not the actions, the choices that he made. So, but it's possible. If it's possible for me, it's possible for everybody. And I just want people to know that you're not alone. There are others who are going through the same situations, same problems, alcoholics and victims of domestic violence alike. And we help each other. That's what we do. We help each
other. Absolutely, we do. Yes, absolutely, we do. Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely. First off, I'm so thankful that you are doing the work that you are doing. You got trained professionally and you are trying to help other women. And I really applaud you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the questions I have, you did mention that you were emotionally and sexually abused in the second marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, when people say they were sexually abused, being in married relationship, nobody sees it as an abuse. And everybody feels like, yeah, it's after all your husband. It is his right to do anything on you, or like, yeah, you belong to him, so he can do anything. How do you answer to that kind of a question?
That's
Reason.
that's a good
Yeah.
question. That's a very good question. So there's a for me, the lines were crossed when uh, it it was no longer an intimate, loving act. It was a demanding. Um, it was more of a demanding act than a consensual loving act. It was plus it involved other people. There were other people involved in his sexual fantasies that he coerced uh, to become involved, and so that you know uh, that alone goes against my religion. He was not a religious man. He was a self-proclaimed atheist. Okay, I had a belief, but I turned away from it because I didn't believe that I was getting help. Um, I know better now. I know better. I know better now that God was there the whole time and was watching out for me and actually protected me from much, much worse. I mean, the things could have been so much worse. Um, so, yeah, I guess that's where the difference is for me. It becomes abuse when it's no longer a mutually consensual, loving part of your relationship. Um, Even though we're married, even though we have that commitment as a married couple to each other, neither one owns the other.
Absolutely
That
looking at that.
marriage license is not a license to control, manipulate, um, or own another person's body or their mind or their purse book or any of that. If you and I would strongly recommend also that people you know have more conversations before they get married about what the expectations are. I always tell people, don't ask me about don't ask me for advice about marriage or relationships, because look what I've done. I'm not the best one to ask. Okay, I have learned a lot, though. I've learned a lot. So uh and the only thing that I have, and I think I told you this the other day, the only thing that I have is my experience, my own experience. And that's the only thing that I have to share, that I am in the hopes that somebody will get something out of it. So
Do you call this sexual abuse as a rape personally? The reason I want to ask specific questions about this is I have been asked questions like that. When
mhm.
I say, like, yes, I've been sexually abused, or like I've been raped by my husband, the very next question is, how do you even call your husband raping you? It's after all your husband. So I'm trying to get another perspective from you to hear that.
Yes. um and my answer to that question is going to be, uh, my belief is, yes, there were times when I would call it rape. I didn't at the time, but looking back on it, I would say definitely yes. There were times when I would say I was raped by my husband many times, and usually it was because, or not because, it usually involved the fact that I was more or less incapacitated by alcohol. There was no fight in me. There was nothing that there wasn't even a part of me that said, yeah, I want to do this. There was just a part of me that said, whatever, just lay back and whatever. It's like, okay. Um, and that's kind of where it was. It was like, oh, whatever. So yeah, so he could have his way with me when he wanted to. And there were other times when it was a more loving type intimacy relationship where we would have sexual intercourse, and it would be nice, but the other times not so much. It wasn't really that nice.
So
Yeah.
other question that I have, when you were mentioning that he was so controlling, even he'll ask you questions when you were on the phone on like, whom are you talking to? What kind of a conversation is that? Is that he carries like a doubt on your character that you will be with someone else, or like, why is that controlling capacity there?
Um, Probably. That was my first husband, and he, well, my second husband was kind of the same way too. But my first husband definitely was. I think there was some jealousy going on. I think that because we were married, his expectation was my attention should be devoted to him and what he wanted rather than anything else. Um, Even to the point of, the kids. It's like we have kids together, but that's a different part of the situation, and you still belong to me in a way. I mean, he wasn't as bad as my second husband in that regard, but I think there was that feeling of you belong to me, and you will answer my questions, you will tell me what you're up to. um, there may have been, I don't know if I don't think I ever really gave him any reasons to not trust me, but there probably was an underlying mistrust or at least jealousy on his part that made him need to know what was going on, who was I talking to, what was your conversation, and what did you say, what did they say. What? Can I please have a conversation with my girlfriend without you wanting to know everything?
Oh yeah, that's always there. Even for me, any phone call doesn't matter. Even if I call my own mom and my dad or anything, even that has to be on a speaker, and I have to talk to them only on speaker. I was never allowed to talk to anybody personally by myself,
Yeah,
whether it is a friend, whether it's a parent, sibling, doesn't matter. It has to be on speaker. Even my office meetings, if I have to take them from house, yes, it has to be on speaker. And he
mm,
says, you might be pretending talking to somebody, saying that you are in a meeting, but the other person might be so different. So I have to listen to the conversation.
mm,
I'm
yeah,
like, how long will the other person really enjoy the conversation when I'm like talking to a person like in a meeting? And if she wants to talk to me on something else.
right.
I was not even allowed to talk to female. That's a whole different thing, actually.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know what's the problem there, but yeah, I
yeah,
was always having that kind of a problem with him.
yeah. My second husband, I bought a horse during that marriage, and because I had still, that was the one thing in my youth that made me feel really good, that I had a connection with and everything. So I had been wanting a horse for a long time, and I'd gone through a couple horses in during the course of my life, uh, but I bought this young horse, and at one point when we were arguing, he I was making payments for this horse. You know, I was working, I was making payments. He sent me out the door. He said, you get dressed up in your sexiest looking outfit and you go to the bars and you prostitute yourself so you can make money to pay for the horse. Otherwise, you're not getting the money to pay for the horse. Right? Yeah. I went out the door in tears. I drove down the road in tears. I turned around and I came back and I said, no, I'm
I
not.
hear you. I know what it is like. Yep.
There's that intimidation factor, and there's like, and people don't understand sometimes. It's like, why do you stay in that relationship?
That was my next
And
question. I was about to ask that.
oh, okay, yeah, well, why do you stay in that relationship? So, um, for me, it was the fear of losing my children, because of course he made those threats that he would take the children away from me, that he would leave me broke, which, pretty much did. But, there were all of these things, all of these unknowns that had me backed into a corner, fearful, so very fearful. And I couldn't think straight. I couldn't think past that to understand that I was completely capable of taking care of myself. I was completely capable of starting over and doing what I needed to do to take care of myself. But at that point in my life, I lacked the confidence, I lacked the self-esteem, um, I lacked God. For one thing, God was not in my life at that point, although he really was, but I didn't realize it at the time. And this man was so intimidating to me, that I could not see my way out, until I finally had enough and said, I have to. I cannot. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot subject my children to this anymore, because of course they were affected too, and he was abusive to them as well. He forced my girls to walk around the house without clothes on. And these are girls who are 5 and, what were they at the time? 5 and 8, 9 at the time. He did things to our little boy, to intimidate him. And he was he was barely toddling. If he didn't eat his food, um, he, for any of them, if they didn't eat their food, it was like, you're going to eat this food, or you're going to have it for breakfast, or you're going to, there were always threats to them, always threats. And at one point he's telling our son, and I hope I can say this, and if not, please
Sure.
edit it out, but
Yeah.
he's telling my son, say there is no good gook except a dead gook. And my son is looking at him like, what? I don't, my son doesn't understand what it means. My son doesn't have a clue what any of it means. But he is telling him over and over and over again, say it, you say this, you say there is no good gook except a dead gook. And I'm like, we don't say those things. We do not say those things. I am not going to raise my children that way, you know? Yeah, and there were other things. There were other things too, but that one sticks out in my mind as one against my son. And he just, I could see my son just kind of going back and back and back into his chair, trying to get away from this man who's pointing his finger in his face and telling him to say these things. And you don't treat children. You just don't. I'm sorry. You don't treat children. Anyway, yeah. So
You also
I had enough, and I had to get out, and I got the help I needed, and I got out.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
You said you were scared while you're drinking and driving. Yes, touch wood, nothing happened ever. But were you really scared that something is going to happen and you wanted to stop, but you couldn't control your drinking thoughts or anything?
Oh yeah. There were times where there were times where I would drive. Of course, I would drive drunk. There was a fear of getting caught. Of course, there was a fear when I'm working at these people's houses and I'm getting drunk. That they're going to walk in the door, and yet it wasn't enough of a fear to prevent me from doing it. It wasn't enough of a fear to prevent me from driving. And all I can say to this day, all I can say is praise the Lord that He watched over me and kept me from those yets. He prevented me from going to jail. He prevented me from getting into an accident and killing somebody. He prevented me from all of these things that could have happened. And that's all I can say is it's just by the grace of God that they didn't, because I can't explain it any other way. There, it's a miracle. It really is a miracle. Yeah.
What is forgiveness in your words?
Oh boy. It's having the compassion and the understanding to know that we are all only the best that we can be at any given moment. We need to have that understanding and being able to put ourselves in other people's positions, get that different perspective to see that they're doing the best they can with what they have to work with. Now, what they have to work with might be very little, and it might be really a sad excuse for living, but they may not know any better, you know. And if Jesus can forgive them, so can I. And ultimately, it is up to God. You know, I can only forgive within my own capacity to forgive. I am not going to be able to forgive the way God does. So having that understanding and knowing that I'm forgiving this person as Jesus would, more or less, when he was here on this earth. That's, yeah, that's what it is for me.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And is there any closing note that you wanted to say to audience?
Just, y'all are not alone. You never are, ever. He's got you. He's got you. But along with that, there are many other people who have gone down this road before you who can share their experience, strength, and hope with you and help you to overcome. And that's, really, isn't that what we're all here for anyway?
Okay, thank you for tuning in, and you can find me on all the socials at Smitha Gunturi and the show notes for any resources mentioned. See you next week. Take care.